Hi, I'm Matt Barry. I'm an independent filmmaker, and this is Low Budget Visions, where we celebrate DIY, personal, independent filmmaking. I have the pleasure of being joined today by Daniel Hutchings, a filmmaker out of England. Is that Manchester? Is that correct, Daniel?
Yeah,
All
based in
right.
Manchester, Matt.
All right. So glad we could finally talk here and go through your films. I think I watched Fifth Quarter, which I thought was really quite unique, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about your background in film, how you got into filmmaking, and just your whole creative process behind these movies or the thingies, as you call them. We can talk more about that. So anyway, without any further ado, Daniel, welcome and thank you for speaking with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great you got in touch. It's terrific to see you doing something around this sort of scale of filmmaking. And I think personally, I take a lot of freedom and a lot of joy from working on the smaller level. I have a little saying, which is to be smaller than a farce. So things are so small that they don't get to the point of being out of hand or disorganized or resulting in something that either becomes something you're not happy with, or even something where you're getting into debt to try and finish, both either financially or emotionally or with time. Yeah, I've been doing thing is since 2014 was when I finished my first one, Dan Go Away. So that's 10-year anniversary this year. We've got an anniversary screening in Manchester in July for that, which is terrific. So everyone's going to come dressed up in a Western outfit, and I'm really looking forward to that. That's in a place in Salford. We've been screening stuff all year, so I'm celebrating 2024 as the year of the thingy. So I'm sort of using it as an opportunity to look back over 10 years of making this kind of like sort of like art comedies, feature length art comedies. Um, I'm very inspired by the Kuchar brothers, which was a specific influence because until I got like way into my adult years, I was just purely a film fan. So I would watch films, be interested in films, read about filmmakers, read about film history, but purely as an audience member. And it wasn't until I saw Jennifer M. Kruth's documentary on the Kuchar brothers, It Came from Kuchar, that I saw that you could have something that was someone else's idea of what movies could be, but made within a domestic setting, which, means it can be part of your daily life and can be part of your family life. So I think it was probably that, and along with an article on Abel Ferrara in The Guardian in the UK around a similar time, so probably like 2011, 2012. And there was a great quote in it where he says, he's asked about why so few of his films at that point had not had a theatrical release. And he said, I don't care, torrent them if you want. But the quote that stood out was, the only thing that's going to stop me is the limits of my imagination. And that was like a little switch went off in my head, and I thought, right, okay, so the kind of filmmaking that I'm interested in and want to pursue is something about exploring your imagination and where those limits meet practicalities and meet other people's imaginations. And I was like, right, got it. And from that, I went on to do a filmmaking MA at Manchester Metropolitan University, and that was like a year long course, and I learned basics to do with digital cameras, basically, and that was enough to start making once I graduated. So I went on to start to do live comedy, and that led into doing Dan Go Away.
Great. Well, first, congratulations on 10 years of making thingies.
Thank you.
That's great to hear. You've been able to sustain it for all this time, and it's also really interesting to hear you cite people like the Kuchar brothers as an influence, as an inspiration for this type of filmmaking, because I do think there's so much that has been out there, all different independent, avant-garde filmmakers, kind of working in these different ways. And with the technology available to us now, I think it's really kind of opened the floodgates of taking these let's call them alternative ways of making a film and really kind of doing our own thing with it. I was just watching an interview with James Broughton, the experimental filmmaker, last night, and this was from the late 70s, and he was saying the thing that he wanted was not more, so much more like honors or awards, but just more money to be able to make films. And I was thinking of that when you made your point that you're looking at ways of trying to work without going into the financial debt, and as you said, the kind of the emotional debt of
Yeah.
struggling to get the movie made. So anyway, I think all these approaches are yield some really interesting results, and it's the right time for it for sure. So I want to go back for a minute,
Mm-hmm.
and you're talking about sort of your interest in comedy, and and live comedy specifically. Can you talk a little bit about how that has shaped your approach to filmmaking in any way?
Yeah, certainly. I think the sort of like the core thing about it is that my like, for want of a better kind of phrase, my like auteurism is part of the comedy conceit. So there's no point where I'm like, okay, well, I'm doing screen comedy, but after this point, like I want to be considered a legit filmmaker. So the whole conceit, the part of doing thing is to draw attention to it being um a kind of like a ridiculous premise to try and make something like at the time that it was a little rarer for people at the time of Dango, a little rarer for people to do feature length stuff that would go um, direct to an audience that didn't try and seek distribution. So part of making Dango Away that I found very exciting was if people came to the screening and literally thought it was like a huge waste of time, then at least it would be laughable, and it will, in the sense that it will be funny, that the sense that this guy might consider like consider some kind of auteurism within what they're doing would be something that would be funny as well. So I think that's a fundamental difference, and I like playing with that. I like having that as something that is fun within it, because again, it's this sense of trying to find screen comedy where I don't want to say everything's up for grabs because that sounds a little bit too aggressive, but something where there's no point where it becomes legit. So, for example, sometimes um, you'll watch a comedy film and there's stuff in it that's really funny, and there's dialogue that's funny, and there's performances are funny, but there's something about the sheen that sort of like bites it back from being full belly laughs or something. And I really enjoy high gloss comedies. I really enjoy big budget comedies. I really love star name uh, screen comedy actors. Um, but for what I want to do, maybe it's a little bit of masochism in me, but like I feel like it's only properly funny if you've got that kind of jeopardy that um, it's going to seem slightly wonky in some way. I don't know what it is, and I don't think it's necessarily production values. I think it's something to do with trying to have a bit of tension of like you don't know which way this is quite going to go, and so sometimes it's production values, sometimes it's like the scale of the filmmaking seems laughable. But in more recent ones, where one like I've kind of like I've evolved how to manifest what I want things to look like, how I want them to play, but also. People making feature film stuff and having them on YouTube is more of a legit thing now. Isn't seen as necessarily like a tactic someone will take once they've given up. It's like that like with when we have the Oscar ceremonies and there's the challenge to try and make a film within the runtime of the Academy Awards, and then everyone celebrates how like instead of watching other people get awards, they made something, and there's a whole dialogue and a community around that. But I think it's really it's a really fun thing to have that kind of tension, especially when you get to doing when we do the public screenings. Is that is part of the fun for them as well, because people bring friends, they don't know what they're coming to look at. Before we have the thingy, we play some trailers from the other ones. We have like sort of content warnings that are kind of humorous and things like that. So we're setting up this whole screening event so people are understand they're supposed to enjoy it as an event before the thing even starts. So just priming everyone for it. So I guess it's trying to step outside of its own boundaries instead of going, okay, so it's screen comedy. So within this, that it's going to be really funny. So I'm always a little bit like, what's just either side of kind of that kind of form? You know, what are little things that can play into it or play around it?
That's an interesting description of it, that tension that you're describing. And I think that is something that comes in with certainly live comedy, live performance, and is often absent from filmmaking because of the structure of filmmaking. Excuse me. I'm curious if you bring a lot of improv into your filmmaking process. This was actually something I wondered about as I watched Fifth Quarter. I'm just curious to what degree you use improv. And I don't even just mean in the sense of the performances, but also just how you're going to shoot something. Is there a degree of improvisation in that?
I think improvisation's like not quite the right description. I think like improvisation suggests something that is part of like a wider sort of like structure. Like you have the script and the idea, and then you might get actors to come in and they might improv around it and develop things. Then you might reformat the script and add those improvisations and develop them, and then get to a formal point of shooting. I think it's probably more like an immediacy. So I think I'm trying to capture an immediacy a lot of the time, and in Fifth Quarter especially, because it's the first one I've done that didn't have a single leading character. So there's three leading characters, and they're all different ages, they're different kind of approaches to being in front of the camera. Some people are more experienced and have more acting chops than others. So my responsibility was trying to have all of those different presence at the same kind of temperature for the audience. So a lot of it is trying to capture the lightning in the bottle. So it's trying to have as little framework in between what they understand they've got to do in the scene and how I'm going to capture them. Everything is very much laid out in script form. I don't think there's only one bit of like dialogue improvisation in the common sense of the word in Fifth Quarter, and that's the story about the milk at the corner shop. And that was a story that one of the cast members was telling us before the shoot, and I happened to be rolling because I was testing the camera, so I just recorded this story. And I thought that's such a perfect little story because it's entry into the kind of the comedy of the city that we're going to inhabit, and we can have something significant that keeps us outside of this corner shop. So once we get to the high street and we stay outside, it doesn't seem like a strange thing. So it was like this little wonderful moment, and it just typified everything that was going to be that the rest of the thing he was going to build on. So yeah, like I think like immediacy seems like probably like a key term. So it's very much how can I capture what I'm trying to reach with as little apparatus, either theoretical or practical, as possible. So this is one of the reasons why I like the Kuchar brothers. Like they would have, like they said, they had their stars in their neighborhood. And so there was this wonderful, I think it was Mike Kuchar quote about them, where he was literally talking about you see someone and you see something amazing in them, you just want to photograph it. And as an outsider, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, that's so amazing. So they're seeing something that is maybe photogenic, but maybe something about who they are as a person. And they're able to capture that and put it within this sort of like home video narrative. And so it's using like all the attributes of cinema and like the idea of having a movie star, but going like, yeah, but they're not just on the screen. They're like in my neighborhood. Like I can see them. They're like these amazing people, you know, and it's not like who they are as a person, not the events in their life or how they've dealt with things. It's something about their presence. It's something far more intangible, and that like Mike Kuchar and George Kuchar were great at picking out and like making it visible to their audience.
Yeah, I think that sense of immediacy and kind of a sense of spontaneity that you talk about arriving at is a really interesting thing because getting back to live performance, I've had this discussion with people, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. I've had this discussion with people that one thing that film screenings, trying to, I think as independent filmmakers, we're always trying to set up screenings for our work, find a venue that we can throw our film up on the screen for a night or whatever. And often that's challenging, at least in my experience and a lot of the people I've talked to. And I contrast that with the opportunities that exist for live music, which seems oftentimes like it's almost endless possibilities for it. And whenever I've brought this up with people, they're quick to remind me that there's a difference. With live music, there is well, first of all, it's happening live. It's not pre-recorded like a film, and that there is that sense of thrill that something unexpected could happen. That there could be maybe a band premieres a new song, with unannounced, or it goes off. There's improv that goes off in some unexpected direction, and they try something new. And with film, realistically, that possibility can't exist in quite the same way. But it sounds like what you're bringing into the production process, and what I think is appealing about like the Kuchars, for example, and this kind of experimental approach, is that we get closer to being able to have those kind of unexpected moments. Your comments about comedy films being there's all the crazy comedy, but it still happens within a more structured, cinematic framework. I'm curious if you. I think it's clear that you're drawing on this tension, from what you said. Do you find that when you have a live screening of your films, do you feel that that energy works with the audience? Do you feel that that excitement happen and thrill happens in the room?
Yeah, I do. I think that's a really interesting comparison between music because it kind of draws attention to how like formal most film goers assume a film's going to be. For example, if we look at sort of the driving circuit in America in the 70s and stuff that would be straight to video, or in this country, stuff like that came up through the video nasties. So the exploitation end of stuff, they knew that they didn't have the production value to compete with stars, but they could have like what we'd now call like a shareable moment, a water cooler moment. So the really good, most common known one is obviously the ear in Reservoir Dogs. So it's like, there's this thing that generates word of mouth, and that's the thing that spreads and builds an audience for productions that don't have any kind of like a large marketing budget, or sometimes a marketing budget at all. And I think that if audiences don't think that there's going to be something that they're going to be surprised or shocked or intrigued or uplifted or enlightened by, then they won't see it as worth leaving the house. And I think that's the value that films that you don't know about can offer audiences. And I think there's kind of been maybe a generation where weird alternative art films, or like what we might call exploitation or like B movie stuff, that hasn't been that kind of level of filmmaking where you go, yeah, it's gonna play terribly, the acting won't be great, but they're gonna see this way out thing, and it's so gross you got to see it, or it was so amazing you got to see it, or it was so funny you've just got to see it. Like, and all those attributes, like it's so bad it's good, or it was really sick, or it's totally perverted. So all the things like John Waters cottoned onto, and things like Eraserhead, all the midnight movie kind of stuff. If audiences don't think films are going to offer that, and that they should go and see it with an audience because it's a different experience, and they should go and see it because if it was on YouTube, it would be taken down because of complaints, or if it's on another streaming format, it will end up getting blocked in some way. If there's not some kind of immediacy, so that immediacy doesn't necessarily have to be spontaneity. It can just be that I'm going to see something that's outside of my imagination and something that I won't get somewhere else. And the communal bit's a big part of it. But I think also it being like, I don't know what's going to happen. And obviously we've got the sort of 3-act structure is very entrenched in films, even in a lot of independent films. And so I do think there is a fatigue where lots of audiences can tell how it's going to play out within the first 15 minutes. And I enjoy kind of playing with that playing with that kind of structure. I've noticed, I was looking back over my 10 years, looking at the 4 that I've done so far, they almost have fake out openings, and they almost all have fake out endings. I think it's like Happy Returns, for example, there was a specific point where like the narrative kind of finished, and then I was like, yeah, but that shouldn't be how it ends as a thingy. There needs to be something that takes it outside of that lead character's perspective entirely and puts everything that's happened up to that point into a different perspective. And I don't know, like it'd be interesting, like your thoughts, but like I kind of think it's kind of a sense of fun on maybe on the filmmaker's part, or maybe in just how they communicate or how they try and get audiences interested in coming to see their film. But unless the audiences understand, they're going to get something. They're going to miss out on that perspective, the auteur's perspective on something in the film. I think it's a tough sell to get people to leave their devices or their front room.
I think you hit on two really important points here in this. And the first is, yeah, creating a reason for people to, to leave the house, put down the devices and go have an experience as a crowd, as an audience together. And the second is what you refer to as the auteur, perspective, that you're getting somebody's distinctive voice in behind this film, and that it adds something personal to it. It's when I see a film with that kind of voice behind it, to me, what I appreciate about it is that somebody cared enough to make this film. It doesn't exist just to make money or just to fill a programming need on a streaming service or whatever. It's that there's a reason somebody made this. And I think if you tap into that, especially if you find a filmmaker whose voice and sensibility you really vibe with, you're on the same wavelength, I think that does add to that sense of fun of wanting to see where that filmmaker is going to take you next. um, and I want to get back to this point about watching the films with an audience, on a screen somewhere, and having that experience. So when you started making the thingies, feature films, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you began from the start releasing them onto YouTube. Is that correct?
No, I've not. This is one thing. Fifth Quarter is the first one I've put as public on YouTube. I use YouTube to host them and have them unlisted on my website. But
Oh, okay. Okay.
I was always kind of timid about them, mainly because I couldn't really see how they were going to have a positive reception
I
on
see.
like a social media platform. So like kudos for like people like Joel Haver have just gone totally for it and like had really good responses and everything. That's terrific, and I applaud it. And in hindsight, might have been a smarter idea to just like stick them up there and like forget about it and carry on making. But there's another film reckoner who does film form, and they do Spider-Man fan films. And he asked me to do a little guest spot as a social media influencer that sees that Spider-Man's back in the story. And he sent me the previs, and on the subscription thing, it's like 79K. And I'm like, going, oh, that's funny. And he went, oh, yeah, this is like, it's an alternative universe where you put your stuff as public as soon as you made it. And that's what you'd be on now if you'd done that. So I thought it was really funny. But yeah, I just used it. I use it for hosting. And so I just direct people to my website. And I think also because I wasn't sure how it was going to affect how I thought of what I did and whether I was kind of strong enough to resist that pull of making for the platform and what succeeds on the platform, rather than making for what I wanted to do as a thingy maker and what I wanted to say with my voice. Because I could kind of see, I mean, it's a thing like with films of any era. There's like quite often there's an amazing first film, and then there's a strange like second film, and then there might be a third film where they've done like their version of like a mainstream like legit film. And I thought, right, well, I've got my weird first film. I'm not like, there's nothing looking like I'm going to have a shot at doing like those second two ones. So I'll carry on staying smaller than a farce and just do these things at the same level and just play a longer timeline to see how all this stuff develops. Because I was pretty certain that if I'm doing this stuff with camcorders and using these streaming platforms to allow people to see stuff, then like over the coming years, other people are going to start doing that as well, and there'll be a tipping point where there'll be a scale of filmmaking that is enjoys that same freedoms and putting them on for immediate sharing, and does like pop-up events and screenings for people to come and see in person. So yeah, I didn't trust the strength of my own auteurism to not get sort of drawn into creating, like, creating for the platform, for want of a better word, like having a content influence.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. I mean, that I think is a real struggle actually when
Mm.
you are putting well any work, creative work out onto the internet, whether it's films on YouTube or I imagine anything else really. It's just that there's that how do you balance that working at a pace that's right for you, working when it's right, when the ideas are there versus that impulse to create content and to kind of
Yeah,
feed the beast, so to speak, with that always demands more and more
yeah.
content. It's something that I'm curious if you ever run into this. Do you ever get concerned that by not putting up more content and not regularly publishing new videos, that it
Mm.
almost runs the risk of your films uh, having a decreased, visibility, kind of almost
Mm.
out of sight, out of mind type of idea? I mean, is
Mm.
that viewing habit of YouTube ever? I mean, it sounds like it was something you were struggling with
Mm.
somewhat. I don't know if that is something you would describe dealing with or not.
Yeah, it's a really interesting. I mean, it's very difficult because the other factor is the viewer's perception and how they evaluate how good something is by how many, like, the data around it rather than their response to it. And I kind of just, I mean, I never, like, my brother-in-law at the time was like saying, "Oh, you should just put stuff up, just put stuff up," you know. And I was just thinking, like, I don't know what it is, but I'm just don't really want to. And I think part of it is, it's like a different platform, and I didn't trust all everything. But I think also, like, at the heart of it, I'm kind of like a romantic artist, and a romantic artist that seems comedic a lot of the time because of their how dedicated they are to being a romantic artist. So um, to a certain degree, like, I don't care as much about like figures or data as I do people's response to the work. And I kind of always thought that I'm going to have more responses and more meaningful responses putting on pop-up events in, like, rooms that venues had let me do so for free, and inviting people I already knew, saying to them they can invite friends, and just letting it build in that way. And I think once I realized that it was those connections and that kind of response to what I was doing that was important. That was what was feeding what the next one would be, and that was what is feeding, like, um, my perspective on it as a medium. And data is very bamboozling, and it's also very easy to hijack, and it's very easy to use data to make it look like you are absolutely correct about everything. And the more sort of data entrenched I've found myself, like, the more sort of the thinner they look as arguments. Like, I always think about, and My Cousin Vinny and Joe, Ralph Macchio is talking about Joe Pesci criticizing the magician that came to his party when he was a kid, and he was going, "Look, it's this," and he was going like, "No, it's not. It's up your sleeve," you know. And Ralph Macchio is describing how great he was then, and so he believes he can be a good lawyer. And so another great performance where someone's being really earnest, and it's just hilarious. So I always think about that, and it's like, what matters to me as, you know someone who is, like, quite earnest about, like, having a romantic and artistic outlook on the world. I think it's very important is that people have a meaningful response to that, and they see that there's comedy value in it. But at the core of it, it's like, I am looking at, like, what connects us as humans. What's the universal experience? What's the human condition about? And a lot of that's in the making. So, I've ended up meeting people I would never have met. I've had experiences with people that I wouldn't have had a making experience with. And I think that's what like this like minuscule level of filmmaking can offer, is that the technology is developed that you can have a maker's life and stay pretty solvent and make stuff that you think is legit, even if maybe other people don't like it because it doesn't have a movie star in, or they think it's too dour, or they think that it's too slow. You can go like, no, I know my stuff. This is brilliant. I'm influenced by Pasolini. I'm influenced by third wave cinema, and like this is where it's at. And other people who know their stuff, they'll come across it and they'll think it's great. I don't need everyone to like this, but I'm communicating to the people that are gonna know what it is and receive it, and through that, like both of us will know, will have less sense of loneliness, or will have less sense of isolation through this. I think that's something that is very common in film fans. Is it's kind of always thought that it's like traveling the world, but without for if you don't have the funds to travel the world, but you get to see the world through other people's eyes. So if you're into a film from different time periods and different territories, you have perspectives on like human endeavor that you just wouldn't have if you didn't have that as your interest. And that's what film offers over the other descriptions of it, like content or TV or any of the other kind of things. Because like you say, no one has to make films. You don't have to make a film. It's not a broadcast channel where there's a slot and something's got to go in there. you know it's not like a feed where you have to have something in every other day that's a certain length, and that's going to dictate everything about you. You've looked at the metrics, and these videos perform well, so you're going to pick that thing again and rework it. You can literally just make something at the early point for the sake of making it, and then through doing that it grows into something else, and before you know it, you've got like a little mini micro culture around what you're doing that maybe is important to the people you knew at the start, but then maybe they've brought in other people, or maybe they've shared it with someone else, and it just trickles out. And one like a little validator I felt was when Nick M62 Films, he made a little documentary on Dango Away where we visited some locations where I'd shot scenes for Thingies. And when he shared that, people found out about Dango Away, and there a bunch of reviews started appearing on Letterboxd, because I'd not added my stuff to Letterboxd, someone else had, and people started reviewing them, and they're like pretty positive reviews. People, they weren't like it's so bad it's good kind of reviews. They were just like, I'm going to pay, like several of them are like, I'm going to pay this the respect it deserves and review it as I would anything else. I'm not going to review it based on its production value, because it has this going for it and this going for it and this going for it. This bit maybe isn't too good, but on the whole, like this is really interesting. And I'm getting the sense that people are realizing is the scale is offering something that bigger budgets can't buy. And part of it's immediacy, part of it is a sense of capturing lightning in a bottle, but then part of it is also like for the audience, an intimacy, like it's made for them. They've come across it, and it's like their thing now. It becomes something that's part of them.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it. And I wanted to just touch on the point you made about YouTube and data, and yeah, how easy it is to get hung up on that and to think, what does this mean? Should I do whatever it is that gets more views? And it's funny because I very much share your perspective that I'm not terribly interested in that. It can be an interesting metric sometimes. But I think trying to figure it out is, I think, ultimately pointless, because you ultimately don't know what led somebody to click on that video. It could have been a mistake. They could have accidentally click on something else. You never know. And
Yeah.
so I talk sometimes about people with this, and they get very frustrated with me because they don't understand why I don't care more about it. And I say, it's not. Look, if you do, that's fine. I'm not. I understand. It's some people very much are data driven and look at those metrics and put a lot of importance in it. I don't. I tend to share your perspective that I would rather have a screening with a small handful of people who get it, who enjoy it, and to be there and hear the reaction in person. And it just reminded me of a story that a friend of mine in New York shared with me. He'd seen a film at a small screening space. It was like I think four people in the audience or something, and I believe the filmmaker was I believe he was there in person or possibly
Mm.
doing like a Q&A over Zoom. But either way, he was aware of the screening, and he said that he would much rather his movie be seen by four people who get it, who appreciate it, rather than getting 100,000 hits on
Yeah.
Vimeo or wherever it was. So yeah, I think that the intimacy, as you say, about a
Mm.
screening space offers so much. It contributes so much to the overall experience, the sense of having discovered something, the fact that you're not being bombarded with $1 million marketing campaigns. It allows that sense of discovery, of connection, and those are things that are often in to short order, I think, in
Yeah.
today's world. So yeah, film can be a way of bringing that together. That's a great thing. Um, there was something else I wanted to ask you about the YouTube screenings. I'm sure it'll come to me, but do you find, let's see, I'm just trying to remember what I wanted to ask you about this.
While you thinking about that, Matt,
Yeah, sure.
I will say, I think another thing that is probably like a big influence on that perspective of data is quite often when I go to the cinema to see big films, there's less than five people in the whole screening. So I don't think I've been. I think when I went to see Barbie last year, that was packed. When I went to see Furiosa last week, I think there was about 10 people. But other than that, very small audience figures. Like I don't know if that's just in my area or it's just going for the times of day I'm going for the film. So I'm not really, like that's undermining like that sense of like these are successful as well. So I'm going like, well, it's like I'm having private screenings sometimes.
Right, right. I remembered with what I was going to ask you with YouTube. It does. I think on one hand, it is the best way of connecting with a kind of hypothetical global audience. But I'm curious, do you see an opportunity there to, going off of that same approach, of wanting, like you said,
Mm.
for people, different places, different to hear all these different perspectives. Do you see an opportunity to set up screenings, not just in the local community, but for filmmakers around the world to connect, like most likely online, of course, but then to bring the films to their local communities and say, here's what somebody across the globe is doing. Do you
Yeah.
see opportunity for cross pollination there?
Yeah, I do. And I think like that's the tipping point where if the sort of like if those that scale of filmmaker can connect, then I think that will create that level of filmmaking that's global and will be in from loads of different places. And so it's like it's almost like you're swapping films, or it could be some kind of online film festival where like a curated or even just an event. Maybe it's like a regular thing, and there's three films play, but they're done as a live premiere through YouTube, and people just stream that in different places um, across like different continents, and share the audience reactions and stuff. Yeah, that kind of thing is like you know I think it's inevitable, and it's just what sort of form and what the films are like is the only thing that's a question mark. Because I think like if the technology will allow it, there'll always be the creatives that want to take the path of least resistance to their audience, to the screening, to the gallery. They'll not want to go through all the pairs of hands that are in front of them. They'll just go, no, I'm taking my canvas, I'm going to go and put it in a room, and I'm going to tell people it's there. So I think it's inevitable that kind of the McLaurian global village idea is inevitable. It's just what the films will be like, and what might happen as a result, and how it might affect how budgeted films. What kind of like will it be something where they'll cherry pick ideas and put them within the same kind of structures, or will it be something where it will make them invest more in stars, double down in like fantastical stuff that's difficult to recreate on a low budget? I think looking at film history, it's probably the former. Usually, the original ideas that can transfer usually end up feeding back in. But I think that's what's missing. I think having like a broader spectrum of filmmaking, a broader spectrum of films, because I think it'd be wonderful if there's all these way out amazing films you can just like check out, and they're like word of mouth stuff, and they've got cachet, and people think they're fun and exciting, and those people get other experiences and they make with other formats and they do other kind of stuff, and then other people can then graduate into that same level, and there can be more of a like a broader spectrum of not just making but also like topics, like what are they about, like what kind of faces do we see when they're in them, what kind of locations are they shot in. I think there's lots of freedom and lots of things that are offered in like minuscule budget stuff that are probably informed by people's immediate lives, but we're sort of in the infancy of people realizing just how much freedom that is. I think Isaac Nwaba from Uganda is like a terrific example. Makes like amazing action, like kung fu drenched flicks in it, like where he lives. Apparently, the story I heard was they made them originally to as like almost propaganda films, so that neighboring gangs would know that their kids knew kung fu. So it's like, we're not going to go and kidnap them because they all kick ass and they're all tooled up. So, but these amazing, like, like, I won't say family friendly, but like they're very like joyous, fun action films. And, he's making them with I don't know what equipment he's working on now because he's doing some other stuff. He's doing a sequel to Who Killed Captain Alex, but working on, I think, mini DV, HDV camcorders, and just, enough know-how to capture what he wants to do. And it's how brave and how inspired that level of filmmaker will be is the only question.
I agree, and that's one of the problems I see, at least a lot of times with the independent film in the US, is that you'll have somebody who makes a really interesting first feature, really, out there approach, kind of anything goes, very experimental. But it seems like rather than growing outward from that, there's a kind of narrowing towards
Yeah,
wanting to work within a more traditional confines,
yeah,
which usually almost always means more money, more budget. And I think that
yeah,
yes, filmmaking costs money, and yes, there are advantages to having a budget, but I do think that oftentimes the kind of freewheeling experimental creativity has to take a back seat as more money enters the picture. And like you said, I think it's right now that the challenge is to to grow in that direction, to grow in. Don't think about narrowing down. Don't think about getting more money. Work with less money. Make it
yeah.
even more inventive, more DIY, whatever and so I think that is a big challenge. I also just wanted to comment real quickly on this point you've made of how to connect filmmakers and share their work. And there's another interesting thing, kind of tying in with the Kuchars a little bit. But in the U.S., looking back at the '60s as a kind of model, you had Jonas Mekas with the Filmmakers Co-op and the whole New American Cinema Group, which I think the Kuchars were more or less considered to be a part of. And so much of that, considering that it was, of course, obviously pre-internet, pre-World Wide Web, any of that stuff, it's remarkable how people all around the country were able to connect and to create a way of sharing the films, making them available, with the filmmakers co-op being a kind of an exchange where prints could be rented and shipped around the country. Needless to say, I mean, it's a completely, like a complete 180 today in terms of the technology. You can connect online, share digital files. At that level, I mean, there's no comparison how much easier it is. And yet, I think there's sometimes a resistance to that because, again, that model means staying independent, staying outside of any established system. And I'm curious if, do you see these as challenges? And if so, what do you think we can do about them?
I think the really important thing about Jonas Mekas is like he had the ear of the people that are interested in not just film but anything remotely cool. And John Waters famously talks about how that's how he found out about the filmmakers that he ended up being inspired by, like the Kuchar brothers and the Warhol set and everything. But also, he's able to state very clearly what like Stan Brakhage was offering. He was like not offering narrative cinema; they was offering poetical cinema. So if you don't like poetical cinema, like just keep on walking. But if you're interested in it, this is what it is. It is this, and I can tell you why it's valuable. I can tell you why it's good, and then you can watch it. I think having that's like a strong critical voice. And I don't mean critical as in describing flaws. I mean critical as in being able to tell the audience what things mean. And I don't think filmmakers can necessarily do that. They're often not very good judges of their own work. But to have like a critical voice that was around sort of like a global scene in a contemporary setting, I think would be probably the most valuable asset, because I think if people want to share stuff, they find a way. I mean, pre-internet, in places that have been under dictatorships, they still managed to share cultural stuff that was like not allowed to be consumed. They humans find a way to find this sort of cultural sustenance. But I think the thing that makes things accessible is not whether they can have a copy of it, it's whether they can be primed to understand what they're going to see. And at the moment, like I'm very conscious that within about the first 30 seconds to a minute, I need to give my audience a reason to stay all the way to the end. So there's got to be something that just alleviates that tension of like, is this just going to be shoddy? And it's like, well, yeah, it might be, but there's that is understood that you might feel that way. So here's something to let you know I'm considering your time valuable, and I'm considering your thought process and your outlook important to this process. And I do think maybe it's not something where there's a figurehead like Jonas Mekas describing it in very sort of like academic, sort of a vocabulary that is not of what like the films themselves. So like when he talks about Kuchar brothers, it's not sort of like the way the Kuchar films play. He's describing it, very, can be kind of dry and like academic. And so I think maybe something that would be useful now for something like that of a global setup is how can the audience understand like the essence of the film and find that attractive as fast as possible.
Yeah, I think what it boils down to is having context. I think that's really what it is, context for how to think about the films. And because we are so inundated with the commercial model, you pay your whatever it is, $10 and get your entertainment for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I think that the problem is anything outside of that does require a little bit of context. And I do think that I say that's a problem. I don't think it's necessarily a problem. I think it's an opportunity actually for filmmakers to connect with their audience. I think in many ways it's actually a good thing. Because it's not that kind of impersonal commercial wall that exists with Hollywood. It is actually more of a direct one-on-one. And yeah, Jonas Mekas certainly, I think, was the model for that kind of critical context, for giving people a way of thinking about these films, which were very different films, but I think shared a common goal of doing something different, offering an alternative, and serving as personal expression. I was reading P. Adams Sidney's book, Visionary Film. And that's certainly very much another example of this kind of context. And then this series I've been watching from the 70s, Screening Room with Robert Gardner, where he interviews Jonas Mekas, James Broughton, people like, all these experimental filmmakers and people from across the spectrum of independent cinema at that time. And there's just those conversations and giving filmmakers a chance to present some of their work. I think it contributes to this larger conversation that is really essential to building this kind of, as you say, kind of a global community of film artists. And getting back to your own description of the auteur perspective behind all this, I think that is really good for people to keep in mind that, yeah, you can make these kind of very funny freewheeling films. They may seem very loose and improvisatory in some ways, very spontaneous and casual, but behind that is your vision and your voice, and that, I think it's important not to lose sight of that, because that's what makes the films unique ultimately. Makes them yours, and I think is the ultimate appeal of it, that we get to hear this perspective. um, I know that we're running short on time, and I wanted to ask if there's any upcoming projects that you would like to
Mhm.
plug before we sign off, or anything else that you'd like to mention that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet.
Uh, yeah, so fifth quarter is currently on YouTube. 10th anniversary of the Dango Away screening in July. And my fifth thingy is slated to premiere at Scholarama Festival in Leeds in September. And if you want to watch anything or read anything, like you can read my thingy making books, you can see all my sort of like Blu-ray style extras all on presentsync.com. There's no kind of sign up thing you have to do to get access to them. There's no payments you have to make, and just go and check out all the stuff. And I'd just like to say thank you very much for having me on the podcast, Matt. It's been brilliant.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we could go for another hour, but perhaps another time if your schedule permits. I found it quite interesting, and would love to hear more of your thoughts on this at some point. I think especially about the idea of screening films and how we can balance that with YouTube. I think
Mm.
that gives something for a lot of filmmakers out there to think about. And yeah, a lot of valuable insights that you shared with us today. So thanks again. All best of luck with your future projects, and I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you very much, Matt. Stay in touch anytime.